session with me, your host, Tucker Johnson, and a new guest, Mercedes Montero, who is joining us today. I found Mercedes. It was going through multiple contacts. I originally reached out to Rosario Traducciones, and they gave me her contact information because she wrote a fascinating piece about gender-free communication, specifically for Spanish translators. I don't want to bury the lead, though. We'll get into that. Let me just give a quick intro here. If you're joining us for the first time, Nimsy Insights does these pop-up sessions from time to time. They are pop-up. We do not announce them. We do not market them because that provides us flexibility. And what also that means, though, is if you want to be notified of when we do these sessions, make sure to subscribe to Nimsy Insights on whatever platform you are watching on, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and these will also be made available as podcasts afterwards. So if you subscribe on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Apple, wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. What other housekeeping items do we have here? We are doing a marathon today. I have branded this, I have labeled this a marathon because I ended up with four of these streams today. So it's super cool. Mercedes, you are number 2, and I promise I will let you talk here. I will let you talk. Later on this afternoon, though, I'm talking to Wendy Pease about her awesome new book, which I still need to find that copy of, called The Language of Global Marketing. And then at 2:30 Pacific time or thereabouts, we are talking to Brian Beck from Billion Dollar B2B E-commerce. That's going to be a very cool conversation. So, with that, I think I'm done. I think that's my spiel. Mercedes, it's very nice to have you. How are you doing today?
Hi. Thank you, Tucker, for this invitation and for this chance to share my views about language with so many people. And I want to thank you also, Rosario Traducciones, for making this contact. So, yes, I'm really thrilled with this chance of having this conversation with you and spare some thoughts about what's going on with language and with language contact, especially this fascinating field that translation implies, right?
Language context? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Oh, okay. I'm just making sure that I understood you. Yes, because, it's very contextual, like what we're going to be talking about today, and which is, how do you put it? Gender-free communication. What is that? Let's unpack that. Let's start there. What is
Quite
meant
difficult.
by gender-free communication?
Well, it is supposed that it means that the moment you write, you produce content, you translate, you communicate in any way, you consciously try to avoid any kind of bias for any gender, either female, masculine, uh, or non-binary. It implies trying to leave gender out of the question and concentrate mainly on the person. You are a person talking to another person, which is what matters. Leaving gender out of the center of attention, right? And trying to make everyone feel included, represented by the way in which you write, the way in which you speak, the way in which you translate. That's basically what it means, at least the way in which we handle it when it comes to translation, right? And that's precisely the difficult side of it because the languages that we work with, in my case, English and Spanish, deal differently regarding gender. And that's why it is so challenging, right? To make, our English speaking clients feel happy and satisfied with the way we produce their translations in Spanish, because our language, Spanish, is different and has another impact when you try to do that. And there are different strategies in which you can leave gender out. And that's why there is so much debate nowadays among us regarding what is correct, what is suitable, what is proper or not proper, whether it is a distortion of language or not. And it has to do with which your priority is, I think, as a professional. And it has also to do with being professional and not trying to make people feel or think the way you do, but trying to make people feel represented by the message that you are producing for them, being aware that it's not yours. when you are a translator. You are
The message is not yours.
the, yeah.
Right.
The important thing is the message and who wrote it. So if the person writing the message in English wanted to be or to sound gender free, and you trust me to translate that piece, I should make it sound like that way.
Well, okay. I want to talk about that. So I want
Right?
to unpack that,
Okay.
but let's back it up just a little bit. So Spanish is a gendered language, right? There's masculine and feminine verbs. So every noun, not verbs, every noun is either masculine or feminine, right? And some of those nouns,
Yes.
which are reflected by the article, the in front of it, and it's also
Yes.
in many cases, most cases, reflected by the actual the actual noun itself. You know, amigo or
Right.
amiga, right?
Yes.
And hey, I'm not trying to like mansplain Spanish to a Spanish translator. I'm just
Right.
making sure if listeners are caught up, if they're listening to
Right.
this. So this presents a unique challenge because we don't have this in English. So,
Right.
and many Americans specifically are ignorant of other languages and the challenges
Of
that are
course.
faced. And
Right.
when we're talking about, and we're seeing language evolve in English, even though we don't have gendered nouns, there is a lot of conversation around the words that are used to describe genders, specifically around personal pronouns. You see on LinkedIn now, a lot of people have their preferred pronouns or
Right.
their pronouns, I should say, in their bio so that people can identify with them how they choose to identify. And so all of this to say that when taking these challenges, these linguistic challenges surrounding gender, and then translating them into another language, the complexities multiply. But I'd like to start with what has been the the Spanish speaking world's response to this? What is gender free language? Like, what does it look like? And I think of this X, using the X instead of the O. But explain that to me if you can.
That's precisely the problem. I mean, the Spanish speaking community is so widespread around the world that there is not consensus yet regarding which is the way in which this should be communicated. So there are many people who believe in this inflection, in this morpheme E or X, to be the ideal one to substitute the gender masculine suffix OA, yes, to show
Hmm.
gender. So instead of amigo, amiga, you may say amigue, for instance,
Oh, okay.
which is a revolution in terms of spelling, in terms of morphology, in terms of syntax. It makes many things change, not only the articles, not only the nouns, also adjectives, also participles. Many parts of the language um, uh, receive the impact if you go that way. That's why there are so many people completely against this kind of change. The same applies to the use of the X instead of OA, right? Which is just another variant. Many people claim, and they are right, that when different devices that disabled people use to read or reproduce, to play the sounds that they cannot see,
Hmm.
this X is difficult to be pronounced. So we, in a way, would be trying not to discriminate against those people who are non-binary or who prefer their gender not to be included in that conversation, but you're discriminating against those who cannot see. So it's not absolutely inclusive. It creates another issue, right?
Right.
And
It's
this is what
sacrificing one including one group at the expense of another. Not because
exactly.
I'm sure there wasn't like malintentions there. I'm sure
No, no,
that's
no, of
not
course not.
good intentions all around, of course.
Exactly, but you are. I mean, another problem arises if you go that way.
Hmm.
But at present, for example, in my city, in the institution where I work, what I teach, there are people using the X, there are people using the E, there are people using neither of them, right? That's the main issue at present. I mean, there is not consensus among the speaking community regarding which is the way, even among those who believe in the need of a change. And then there are those who prefer things to remain as they have always been. I mean, OA and generic masculine to refer to everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which implies just the priority of one of the genders over the others. Because our Spanish grammar says that it is the unmarked gender, but in fact, it's the one that has always had priority.
Sure.
It is not unmarked. It is the one that has always had priority, and we have to accept it and leave it there, or just do something to change it. Another alternative that many people go for, because it's, less controversial, is trying to use different lexis, different vocabulary, or to paraphrase. And instead of saying, for example, amigo, amiga, say something like people, gente,
Mm.
you feel comfortable with, or people you have with whom you have a friendship. I'm using abstract nouns like amistad instead of the noun amigo, and trying to avoid these personal nouns, with a personal reference, in order to kind of skip the problem, right? And many times when translating or writing for people that trust on us to communicate their message, we do that so as to, so as not to be disruptive regarding grammar rules, the ones that have always been established, but at the same time be gender free when writing. So as you can see, it's there is a lot of debate about that. There is a lot of debate. And there is a lot of people who feel rather offended when you use it. And there are a lot of people that complain when you don't use it, right? Because they say, hey, you are not including me. Why do you talk to me like that?
Damned
It's
if you
a
do,
problem.
damned if you don't, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the
Yeah.
thing is that we have to stop and think what we should do, what we are doing, what has been done with the language that we're speaking. And we need to understand that we are responsible for it too. We are part.
But
I noticed that there
let
are
me
many
stop
people
you.
waiting for someone to tell you what to do, right?
Yeah.
Many of my colleagues are kind of waiting for someone to say, well, hey, this is accepted. Now you can do it.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, who are we waiting to tell us what to do?
Well, and who's we? Right? Who's we? Now, this is
Yeah.
what I want to ask, because you say it's like, oh, there's this hot debate going on, and there's controversy, and
Yeah.
all of this stuff. But who is we? Are we talking about like linguist, like translator
Yes.
communities, Facebook groups, prose boards, or are we talking about the general public on this? Because one thing that I've noticed is these gender and like language justice type things that were coming up these days, they're seeping into the mainstream, and it's fascinating to watch, because typically this localization industry, like we're a shadow industry, like we operate in the background. No one knows we exist if we're doing our job right, right? People only know
Exactly.
translation exists if there's a problem, if you get screwed up, right? And for perhaps not the first time, but for a time right now, we're seeing things pertaining to language, things pertaining to translation, interpretation, being reported on in mainstream news, in everywhere. And it's interesting to watch. So that's why I wanted to declare. That's just all a very long-winded way of asking you, who is we? Like, who is discussing this?
Okay. Yeah, sorry, because I took it for granted, but it's not, so clear. When I say we, I'm talking about the ones that work in the language industry, the ones
Okay.
that think of translation as a profession, the ones who, like me, for example, translate but also teach and prepare others to do my job as a translator in the future, right? I think that we should take responsibility, because whenever I talk to my students, I tell them, hey, you're not just language users like any other. You will not be like the general public, because you will be creating language when you translate. People will learn how to speak Spanish from your translations.
Mm, mm-hmm.
People will assume that the way you translate is right just because you're using it. If I'm working in a factory, for example, and the operator's manual reads something, I will assume that it is correct. I won't think that the way in which the translator has conveyed the message is wrong, I will trust the translator. That's why I believe that translators, especially the ones that will enter the job market in the future, should be really prepared for this change and for this challenge.
Well,
Because they are, I always tell my students, listen, you are the linguistic models of my kids. Because my kids will watch cartoons that you will translate, will use toys that you will,
right.
whose instructions you will translate. So you will teach my kids how to speak Spanish together with me. And you will create, I mean, linguistic awareness among the citizenship also regarding gender, right? So instead of sitting here and wait for the Royal Academy to tell us which is the list of rules that we should apply or not, just stop and think, okay, what can we do about it in the meantime? Are we going to promote language change? Are we going to put a stop and say, no, let's sit and wait for the language change make getting out of the question? I mean, as translators, I think the same regarding teachers interacting with kids. I mean, I'm a mother of three and I'm very worried about the kind of language they are learning.
I'm very
I'm
worried
really
about the
worried and
language
I
my
pay a
kids
lot
are
of
learning.
attention.
Yeah, I have a bad
It's
mouth.
that's another issue.
Yeah, that's another issue.
Yes.
Mercedes, I don't
Yeah,
want to
that
interrupt you.
is
You're
another
on a
issue.
roll, but I'm trying to get to these comments here. And oh, one of these is old, but Mario Line. Oh, did I just completely disrupt the flow? I'm sorry. These comments are from my old session.
No, it's okay. Don't
Disregard.
worry.
This is our first marathon. I've never done this before. So comments,
Okay.
we'll get those out of here. All right.
Don't worry. Okay.
I killed your flow here, but but by all means continue. I'm just sitting here like in awe, like listening to this because it's hard because this is a controversial thing, or people can
Mm-hmm.
make it a controversial thing. It's very hard, or I have found it very hard to find like unbiased information about like because I just want to know like what does this look like what is gender free communication, what is avoiding linguistic discrimination, how can you discriminate linguistically, like I want answers to these questions, but it's very hard to find answers to them because what is published out there is usually taking one side. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? It's
Exactly.
picking a side. So it's very nice just to talk to you and kind of understand this is what it's all about. This is why people are challenged by it. But
Mm-hmm.
a question that I had though is you started off by saying essentially translation is just about relaying the message. I forget how you put it, but respecting the source message, respecting where it's
Mm-hmm.
coming from. And so, will that inform how you translate? So, like, if you're trying to translate a message that is the context of it, you mentioned context. The context is
Mm-hmm.
trying to show tolerance, inclusion, celebration of gender neutrality or gender causes or something like that. That's the audience, right? In English,
Mm-hmm.
then you would use gender free language in Spanish. However, if the source was coming from someone who doesn't care about that, then you would use normal Spanish or like old Spanish. How does that work? Like when do you use it and when not? When do you use X? When do you use E? Or is it a conversation?
I Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I cannot tell you how it works. I can tell you how it works for me,
Okay,
how I
that's all.
do.
That's
I
all I
mean,
care about. Like I don't.
yes,
Yeah, I
okay, okay.
exactly.
That's the point because what I want to make clear is that I am not giving anyone instructions on how to do his or her or their jobs. I mean, it's up to you. But if in my particular case, if I receive a text from a client and that client wants me to translate that piece of text for a community, and I noticed that the way in which it was written is not precisely gender free and that it may cause some kind of rejection among certain people in the readership, I may probably write a message or try to get in contact with the client or the person who wrote it and ask for advice or give advice regarding that and tell them, hey, why don't we rewrite this sentence for this sentence or paragraph or expression not to be used and be more inclusive and and not be so biased, unless you want intentionally to give this kind of message. With based on on that conversation with the client, I will make my decision.
I'm interested in that.
Because
Like, what if someone wants
if
to
I
be
see that,
biased?
if you want to be biased and I am a professional, I need to respect your or reject the job and tell another person to do it.
Okay.
If
Easy answer.
if that is against my values, and I can see that the way in which you address your audience is aggressive, non-inclusive, I don't know, discriminating, I may say I am not the right person to translate this piece of text.
Makes
But
sense.
if this is not your intention and you are discriminating against some people or not including some people, but you are not aware of that, it is part of my job to tell you, to give you advice on how to
J-
solve it, to make
j-
your source text
Yeah.
better, and then do my job as a translator better,
As a
or the
translator, and
translation
because the
and
best
the source.
translators, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there's a delay, but the best translators are
Yeah,
really linguistic consultants, right? And to
right.
look at it that way, what is the job of a consultant? The job of the consultant is to make sure that her client is operating, not to make the decisions for the client, but to make sure that their client is operating with all available and relevant information so that they can make
Exactly.
informed decisions. So, I mean, if you think of it that way, I mean, absolutely, you need to have that conversation with the client. The client might say, it's not a priority. Okay, you've done your job as a consultant, right? And
All
then
right.
you can
Yes.
make a decision where to go from there.
And on the other hand, I wouldn't use E or X without your consent. I mean, if you
Yeah.
are trusting, if you trust on me to provide, I mean, to translate your message to the general public, I will tell you what the options available are, and we will get to an agreement regarding what to use or what to do. That's what I have done so far in all the instances in which things like this has happened to me, right? What I wouldn't do is use inclusive language, I mean, this X or E, without telling you in advance, without your consent,
Right.
because you are writing through me. It's not me having a conversation with my friends. If it's a conversation with my friends or a conversation with my students, I will talk to them the way they want to be addressed and
Hmm.
the way I feel comfortable addressing them. As simple as that. But I wouldn't impose my personal options in your text because the text is yours and the community that you're addressing, it's the one that you have chosen, not the one that I have chosen. That's the way I see it in terms of professional translation.
Well,
Then
and
in your
that's
personal
our
life, you
job.
can speak the
To
way
our
you want.
to our
That's my
point
job,
earlier,
exactly.
is our job is to be in the background, right? You know, I talk about
Exactly.
this is a shadow industry that nobody knows about, and it's easy to interpret that as like me complaining about like, oh, nobody appreciates us, like we do so much and nobody even knows that we exist. No, it's not that. It's if nobody knows about translation, then that means that's like our key success metric. That means that we are actually doing our
Exactly.
job. So, yeah, you shouldn't be inserting yourself into things. You absolutely should be in
No.
the background. And by you, I mean we.
Yes, he said that we should take an active role, yes,
Indeed.
regarding linguistic issues, both regarding the target text and regarding the source. Sometimes, what I notice among many colleagues is that they say, well, if the source reads like this, it's the source and we must respect the source. But maybe the source is not right. I mean, maybe the person who wrote it was not a linguist or was not aware of this kind of issue happening.
Mhm.
And why won't you tell him or her or they, hey, shall we improve it or not? What would you like to do? How would you like to sound? What kind of impact are you expecting to make in your on your audience, right? And based on that answer, you may do your job much better. I mean, at least knowing that you're not assuming things that are wrong, right? Um, and I really like it when I work with people who appreciate that part of your job, that extra part of your job. If you are getting paid per hours or per number of words and you do this, obviously it takes more time, but it's an added value that I think it's maybe more valuable, even more valuable many times than the translation job itself.
And speaking
At least
from,
in my case, I really enjoy it.
uh, and I love working with linguists and consultants like yourself that do enjoy it and are a source of value and knowledge. And as we're talking about this, I can definitely put myself in the shoes of the client here, because I just recently, and like it's not common that I need a translation and like need to rely, like ask somebody for help. Like I work at NIMSY. It's literally our job to help people with questions about language, translation, and all of that stuff. But one
Right.
thing that, one area that NIMSY is recently like prioritizing and turning our focus into, because it's not a very well researched area, is sign language and language access for deaf and hard of hearing people, because that is a big thing. We just published our American Sign Language and the size and state of the interpreting market report and all of that stuff. And this isn't just a shameless plug. It's there's a point here. The point is I needed to hire an interpreter for American Sign Language. I don't, that's not my world, right? Like I'm loving it. I'm learning more about it, but it's not where, these aren't my
Right.
people, right? I'm an outsider. So I'm ashamed to say this, please, if, if you work at an ASL
I won't
company,
tell anyone.
no, I'm ashamed to say this, but I hired an interpreter off of Upwork, and it was just a delightful experience because, and she worked with an agency, I believe, but it was just a delightful experience because, like, she would ask me questions and she would guide me through it. So, questions that I didn't even think, like, what kind of background do you want? What tone do you want? I'm like, oh, tone? What are you talking about? There is no tone. It's sign language, because of my ignorance. And, I can show
Right.
it here. This is the report. And obviously there's no sound to it. This isn't the report, but this is what she did, and I'm going to get her name so I can tag her on this and she can see it.
Yes.
Because I'm very pleased with this work, which was done in less than 24 hours, by the way. And the reason it was done
Amazing.
in less than 24 hours, is because she worked with me as an expert consultant, right?
Right.
She helped
Right.
guide me and ask me these questions and made sure that I was aware of all of these things that I wouldn't even have thought of. Like, what's the wardrobe? I've never had to ask a translator, all of these these Spanish translators, and I apologize if you are deaf or hard of hearing and you're trying to watch this at the same time as reading the captions. It's not syncing, but I'll move away from that. Where was I going? Where was I going with this? Oh, I'm sorry. There
Okay.
you are. Anyways, it was a very nice experience, right? And I imagine that's what people should expect from you when they come to you for Spanish translations. Being made aware of, asking the questions they don't even think to ask, and being made aware of the challenges that they're not even aware of.
Yes, we are always expected to give advice and to ask for advice or at least for opinions regarding the decisions that we're planning to make or that we would implement in the translation, not only regarding gender, also regarding tone, as you said, register, the dialectal variety that you're going to use, or how understandable certain terms would be, or if they are related to a certain Spanish speaking region or not. There are many issues that should be included in our conversations with the clients, especially now when this gender language is so debatable, right? And also what you said before, issues regarding the diversity of people who will access your text should be taken into consideration. I always think of a lot about the complexity of the sentences that I have to translate when the people who will read them, uh, may have different educational levels. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have to bear in mind all the time, is this sentence too long, too complex? Leaving aside gender, yes? So being inclusive implies much more than gender itself. Obviously, gender is an issue, a very important one, but it's not the only thing to bear in mind when you
No,
want to be inclusive, really inclusive.
it's just the latest in a long list of things to be aware of.
Yes, 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 yes.
And that's why it's fascinating for me to talk about. Question: how has like academia? Because Spanish is, I don't know the term, but it is a regulated language, so to speak, right? Like there's associations. I'm thinking of, hey, and excuse my dumb question. It's not a Spanish linguist, but like the Real Academia de Español, I believe, like publishes guidelines and stuff. So there are resources out there. It's not like an underserved language. How have quote unquote the authorities or the powers that be in the profession for the language, how have they reacted to this? Or how are they reacting to it? Are they reacting to it?
They are reacting, yes, of course, because they have to give us some kind of an answer or some kind of guideline. They are reacting against it. But they have,
Oh,
to begin with, the fact that they have stopped to think about it, to analyze it, to do research, and then give a reply, it's a clear sign that they are worried about it because it is undeniable. It's happening. They told us once and again that we should refrain from this kind of these alternative morphemes E and X to substitute O and A, saying that it is a way, saying that it is a strategy that complicates the way in which Spanish is used and it is not part of the nature of our language, as if it were not
well,
masculine gender is another convention, but
what is the nature of a language? Language, by definition, is a fluid. Okay, sorry.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
That's they want to keep. They want us to keep things the way they were, the way they have always been in terms of the tradition, the linguistic tradition, right? And they claim that masculine gender is the unmarked gender, and so we should be happy using it to refer to people, all kinds of people. Yes, either male, female, non-binary people. All of us should be feel pleased and happy with masculine generic. But the fact is that it's not really happening. Many people feel out, many people feel offended, many people feel not represented by it, so we should do something about it. What they suggest, what they also say is that the use of duplicates like todos y todas instead of, when you want to say everyone, instead of todos, which would be a case of generic masculine, many people are using todos y todas or todas y todos to make it clear that they are referring to both men and women. According to the Academy, that is redundant, that is not necessary, that is against linguistic economy, and it creates a lot of problems too, because sometimes when you have character number restrictions, when subtitling, for example, it's a problem if you go that
Sure.
way. We should be very creative so as to find ways in which you can be gender free or try to be gender free and keep to the rules. Follow the rules the way they have been implemented so far, so as not to offend anyone. And besides, another issue is that using the X or the E sounds very
Well,
disruptive for some
first of
people,
all,
and so sometimes,
can I just interrupt for
yes,
1 second? How do I
of
pronounce
course.
the X? Right? If todas, how do I pronounce toad XS?
No, you can't. You can't
Oh,
pronounce
it's
it.
just written. Okay.
You say todas. You say todas.
Todes,
Todas.
like with an E, right? Todes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
In Argentina, there are many people, especially those aged 20, those in their 20s.
Hmm.
It's very common to hear them saying todis with an I, right?
Right.
Hi, amiguis. Yes, things like this.
Okay,
As a kind of
okay.
funny way of speaking, but it's a clear symptom that younger generations need language to change.
Yeah,
And
they
my
younger
question is,
generations need language to change. Well,
yes, yes,
universal truth. I think that's
it's
probably always been true, right? It's just this
yeah,
is
it
the
has always been
latest
true.
generation.
Exactly. But
But
what I
the
wanted to
difference
say is
here,
that
okay, yeah,
yes,
go. I don't.
no, something, just a comment that the point is that also when you face a text that you have to translate and you think, okay, this text has nothing to do with gender, so I'm going to try to avoid gendered words, blah, blah, blah. And I'm
Reasonable.
going to use, for example, E or X in my nouns, right? Probably, many readers feel distracted from the main points
Hmm.
that the text is dealing with, from the main topic, because many of them will feel either rejection or surprise the moment they read that spelled that way.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful and tactful when using these kind of alternatives, because among certain communities it is not so established yet. So we have to be very, careful when and where to use it. Yes, depending on the communities that you're addressing, the topics that you're discussing, or the kind of genre or the text type you're dealing with, right?
So I have a question because, going back
Yes.
to like me looking at the media and stuff, it seems to me like particularly like here in the US, the conservative, and by conservative I mean like not wanting change, right? Wanting the tradition, wanting to keep
Mm-hmm.
things the way that they've always been. It's like they paint a picture of the opposing side as like these militant, like demanding change, and it's like, yeah, 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 whatever, whatever, whatever. But is there an aspect of truth? Are there people, because what you've just been discussing is incredible, sounds very reasonable. It's like, yeah, we need to take a nuanced approach to this and case by case and make sure that people are educated so that they can make their own informed
Mm-hmm.
decisions. um, are there um, are there like causes or programs or like activism out there that are going above and beyond to force this into it? Or is that just a boogeyman that's been created by the media?
No, there are, you mean if there are training courses or actions to prepare people to do this, to use this
No, like
in
lobbying
their daily
efforts
life?
to force, like specifically what I'm thinking of, like things to like force change, like legislation, stuff like that.
I see what you mean. There is a trend, or yes, we may call it a trend towards language change in the way in which, for example, legislation is written,
Okay.
in order to avoid gender biased. And so far, the changes that have been implemented in terms of legal writing have to do with this duplication, diputados and diputadas, for example, yes, políticos y políticas instead of políticos for politicians, for example, or ciudadanos y ciudadanas instead of citizens, ciudadanos, right? But they haven't introduced
I'm nodding
EX
as if yeah,
systematically.
Spanish, yeah.
But there is also a kind of a confusion, because at the same time, some government agencies do use X, either X or E,
Oh,
when addressing the public. For example, in the street, you can see notices, or you can read, labels, or material distributed for
so
training
so it's
people, for
happening.
example. It
Yeah.
is happening, and
I
it's not a
I
question of people who are in their twenties only. I see it
okay,
in this
okay.
in my city. If I walk 10 blocks in my street, I can take pictures of notices written in one way and notices written in another way. In the same translation school where I work, I
Mhm.
receive, for example, letters from the authorities written that way with X, and letters from another fellow teachers written in another way.
Mhm.
And so you wonder, how should I talk to my students? The way I want, this way. Nobody tells you, yeah, this is mandatory. You should use this. And if one of my students, for example, submits a paper to be assessed, to be marked, using this one of these options all the time,
Mhm.
I cannot tell him or her or they that that's wrong. On the contrary, there are many people have already
But I'm
got
sure.
their degrees
Yeah.
with papers written this way. And so that's why I say it's happening. There are
And
judges
hey,
who
I
have.
warned you at the beginning of this thing. You're talking to an ignorant American here, right? um, because like I'm not
No, not
around
at all.
it. I'm not around it, and like unfortunately, something happened that's been preventing us from traveling. So I haven't even gotten to visit all of these places. I'd
Right.
love, I'd love
No,
to
but
find an excuse to come back to
it's
Rosario.
fascinating.
You know,
Do come back.
we can do
Yes,
this again
please.
in person.
It's Yes, of course, of course. It's fascinating. To me, at least, it's really fascinating because I remember I am 45. When I was in my 20s and I was studying at university, whenever we read about linguistic change, language mutability, it was kind of a theoretical thing, something
Hmm.
that happened slowly, very slowly, that you were not even aware of. Or we could, to give an example of that, you should go back to the 17th century and think about
Yeah.
two different literary pieces written in the 16th century and the 17th so as to notice some kind of change. And now, just if I analyze the way I spoke 5 years ago and I compare it to the way I speak today,
Mm.
there is a world of difference, right? And I know in my family, in my kids, I mean, you see it everywhere. So it's not just something I believe that it's a matter of fashion or ideology. It doesn't have to do with being feminist or not. It has to do with communication needs
Mm.
that society is solving in a certain way. Yes,
And
and
solving
that's why I'm
quickly.
so interested in it
Like
quickly.
the
Right.
pace of change is increasing, and I keep thinking of it as, if you look at language, and we call it the evolution of language, right? And
Yes.
evolution is a slow process. If I think of evolution, I think of how did the dinosaurs become chickens today, right? So millions and
Yes.
millions of years. But scientists, when they want to study evolution, when they want to study genetics, when they want to study and gene variations and such things, they'll use fruit flies, right, which live for like a day. So they can get multiple generations and start to see that
Right.
pace of evolution. If you want to study, evolution, you don't study humpback whales. You study fruit flies because the pace is quicker. And I feel like the
Right.
evolution of all language, but some more than others, certainly, the evolution, the pace of change is quickening. And like you said, it's like
Right.
we get to see like
Definitely.
these phenomenon that we've like studied and have been theoretical things playing out in real time in a day and age where everything is broadcast live like this, and
Exactly.
we have a
Exactly.
front row seats.
Yes, exactly. I always tell my students that this is a privilege that we have
Mm.
because we are part of the problem, we are part of the phenomenon that we are describing. We are part of it. We
Hmm.
cannot be objective and say, well, look at what happened. It's happening. You are part of it. It's the way in which you speak, right? I receive emails from my students all the time, and among the same group of students, some of them write this way, I mean, with an X, and the one sitting next to him or her writes with OA, right? And I know that probably they are guessing, how should we address this lady? How would she feel when they write an email to me asking for permission, for example, to submit an assignment later than expected or something like that? That's a typical message. They may be wondering, how would she feel? Because probably they don't speak to everyone in the same way, right? And if you are looking for a job, for example, as a translator, you should think, okay, how I expected to address my potential employer? Or should I make a comment about this or not? I mean, so language is changing and it's
Well,
undeniable, and we are part of it, and we have a responsibility. I insist on that. It's not just sit and watch what people do. Do
yeah.
something about it, because if you are a translator, you produce language and you change language if you want, or you make language remain the way in which you complain that it works, right? So that, and besides, society is changing a lot. People play different roles in society at present. So how are we going to describe these roles if we lack the words to refer to them? Which
Indeed.
pronoun should I use to refer to a person? In my language, for example, in English you have they, singular they. But in my language, if one of my students tells me tomorrow, hey Mercedes, I am non-binary, so please respect my decision. Of course, I want to respect that decision and I value a lot this decision. But there is no pronoun available, according to the academy, that I can choose to refer to this person, right? So, in the grammar books that I have read, this is non existent as an option. So, I should address this person using masculine generic. And this is precisely what the person is telling me not to use with him or with them in this case,
Yep.
right? And people belonging to my generation, for example, and those who are involved in this kind of thing were all the time kind of monitoring the way the way in which you speak and correcting yourself all the time, because it's an extra effort that we have to make. We were taught to speak in a certain way, and now we don't like that way anymore, and so we need to be very attentive.
Yeah. And I think that also
Mainly
there's
when you speak spontaneously.
this classic example of just, people don't like change. And that doesn't get better as we get older. As the older I get, the less
Right.
I
Yes.
appreciate change. We have a question. Let's
Right.
do this. We have a question from down here in the comments. Let's look at that because it looks very interesting
Yes.
to me. And then we need to close this up because I've got a hard stop here.
Yes.
So Tyler Snow, thank you. Are non-genderized objects going to lose their genders now in Spanish? This is a good question. So like la televisión, ferrocarril,
Yes.
etc. Wow.
No, these non-genderized objects are not going to lose their agendas because they are not part of the problem. The problem arises when you deal with nouns referring to human beings. When the nouns that you're talking about or the pronouns that you're using refer to people. Yes, that's the problem.
Important distinction, right? Because to the uneducated, or not uneducated, but perhaps uninformed student of this, like myself, I put myself in that category. Like it's easy to think, oh man, they're
Right.
using X's like on everything. Holy moly, like
No.
why? Oh, and no,
No.
it is only when referring to people, right? Or
Only when referring to people, exactly. And only in those cases in which the word that you're using to refer to people is a word ending in O or A. I mean, if the word that you're using is marked by this masculine genetic inflection O. For example, if I say estudiante, student, right? Estudiante ends in E. The letter is E. So there is no change going on there because there is no need. E includes both female, male, non-binary students, right? The problem arises when you use alumno, alumna, amigo, amiga, maestro, maestra. This is the heated area, right?
you're going into teacher mode on
The
me here.
controversial one at least.
You're going into teacher mode. Oh,
Sorry.
Mercedes, I gotta call it. I could talk to you about this for another hour because
Oh,
it's super fascinating and you seem to know quite a bit about it.
it
But
is.
before we
Right.
go, I do want to give a shout out to Rosario Traducciones. Perhaps can you tell us a little bit about Rosario Traducciones? Like how to pronounce it properly?
Yes. Yes, Rosario Traducciones is a very important translation agency, one of the first translation agencies in my town, in Rosario. And they provide linguistic services to many, many companies around the world, not only in English, also in German, in Italian, in Portuguese, in Chinese, in many, many other languages. And they hire professionals from different fields, and they provide translation services, but also transcreation, proofreading, content writing, interpreting services to many different sectors in the industry. And they are a great, great, great team of people to work with. I really love them all.
Yes,
So
thank you again. I was trying to give you applause here and give you a round of applause. Thank you, for making this happen. Thank you for coming on and being a guest. Any final words before we close it up for the day here?
well, thank you again. Thank you for this opportunity to spend some time discussing something that I love so much, that is language and language change mainly. And a final comment could be that if you are working in the translation industry or in the linguistic services sector, uh, we should all take this really seriously. I mean, spend some time to think, to observe, to analyze how language is changing because society is changing in order to provide the best possible service to those who trust their text to us, their messages to us. And remember at all times that we are the ones who carry the message. We're not the owners of the message. So our decisions, our values, our ideas should be left aside in order to concentrate mainly on the client's needs and the audience's values and needs when reading that message for making communication happening. Yes, which is our main goal, right? And then, of course, as speakers of the language, we can speak the way we want back at home and with our friends. But the moment we're working, we should be very professional and pay attention to what is needed, right? And to which alternative works best in each case. But definitely, we have to be part of this process in a responsible and active way. Yes.
Thank you one more time.
Thank you.
Nothing to add to that. That was beautiful. Quick
Okay, thank
reminder
you.
for those of you guys that are watching, I'm going to be doing this again in like 15, 20 minutes. We've got Wendy Pease coming
Okay.
up next, is the next on our lineup here, going to be talking about her new book, The Language of Global Marketing, and what insights we can find from that. And then at 2:30, 2:45, 3-ish, we're going to be talking to Brian Beck of $1 Billion B2B e-commerce. So make sure to join us for that. Mercedes, thank you very much. And we'll have you on again sometime. You know, don't be a stranger. And
Okay, I hope so. I hope so.
you want to get that message out, you want to inform and educate, I'd be honored to be a channel for you to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. It will be a pleasure for me to do this again as many times as you want. Okay.
Adios.